everyone, and welcome back to the George Collection. I'm Rachel Rightside Blonde. As most of you know, the October issues of the original George magazine, the anniversary issues, are some of my favorites. The articles in these magazines are like something you'd find in a Blacklist episode.
My name is Raymond Reddington. I'm here to tell you a story. I'm sure you recognize many of the faces behind me. They are among the most powerful men and women on the planet. They are also part of a global conspiracy, a shadow organization that spans across every continent and has for the last 3 decades, consisting of leaders in world government and the private sector. Some call this group the cabal. The world you live in is the world they want you to think you live in. They start wars, create chaos, and when it suits them, they resolve it. Investigating this group will immediately position you as a threat. If you do what I'm asking, you will be putting your lives and the lives of those you love at grave risk. In the end, the truth will out. Not all of us will live to see that day, but the truth will out.
Cool gadgets, schemes, sabotage, success, all of it, right here in these issues.
I know him better than he knows himself. And now after all this time, I finally figured out a way to trap him. I will become him.
For today's episode, I wanted to read one of those articles to you, and I think you'll be thoroughly entertained.
The only question is whether you'll live to see the day. If I continue to dismantle the cabal, they'll put a bullet in your head just to mitigate their losses. Everything is working according to plan, Peter.
Your plan is no concern to us.
You have no money to escape the inevitable. Your colleagues will abandon you. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but soon enough, because I'm not going to stop until they do.
Unless I exonerate Keith. Such a generous offer. I'll have to decline.
I'm going to bring this whole damn thing down on you, Peter. And when I do, your own people will beg me to kill you to stop the bleeding.
I'm gonna pull the whole thing down. I'm gonna bring the whole fucking diseased, corrupt temple down on your head. It's gotta be biblical.
This article is called Trading Faces. Richie Ramos was the meanest drug dealer in Philadelphia. Jose Castillo was a hero doctor praised by President Clinton. Now the government claims Castillo used his surgical gifts to help the fugitive drug lord escape the law. And a stunned city can't believe it's true. Dr. Jose Castillo was most likely writing poetry in his den, as he liked to do on cold winter evenings, the night the cops finally caught Richie Ramos. If it was a moment that the doctor dreaded would come, he shared those fears with no one. It was the night after Martin Luther King Day, but the doctor's routine hardly ever varied, even during holidays. His patients knew they could show up at his doorstep in Center City, Philadelphia at any hour, 7 days a week, and be treated for whatever ailed them, often for free. Only after he said goodbye to his last patient, sometimes as late as 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, did he lock the door of his tiny clinic with its cheap Venetian blinds and walk up the hard metal stairs to his home. There, to the strains of classical music that his wife Nelia liked to listen to, he would paint, read his books on philosophy, or write his poems. But on this night in January 1992, a drama was unfolding that would forever change the life of the good doctor and leave a city reeling. The feds finally caught Richie Ramos. For 16 long months, Ramos had been Philadelphia's most wanted fugitive, a baby-faced drug lord who had managed to sell more than $20 million worth of crack and powder cocaine on the streets of Philadelphia, then slip right out from under the cops' noses. Since the hot September night in 1990 when the 22-year-old Ramos had disappeared, the police had hunted him and cursed his name. Now their fugitive got nabbed while bending over to check a flat tire. The cops had been warned that there would be bloodshed if Ramos was found. You're not going to get him alive, it was said. Yet oddly, Philadelphia's most notorious drug lord simply put up his hands. "I'm Richie," said their fugitive, and then he wet his pants. Word spread fast through the streets that Ramos had finally been caught. To the Philly cops who had spent a large part of their careers trying to bust up his drug ring, this was, in the dry words of one, very good news. They knew how Ramos enforced his turf with baseball bats, how he once had a rival's teeth removed with pliers, and they nicknamed him Gumby. Some of the cops couldn't wait till morning to see their prey behind bars and showed up at midnight to look at Ramos in the cell block. But something was weird. One of the marshals noticed it first when he saw Ramos in the holding tank. His fingertips. There were these weird circles on each of his fingertips. Not only that, but he didn't really look like he did in any of his old mug shots. He wasn't fat anymore, for one thing. His hair was longer, but his face looked different too. At midnight, Philadelphia detective Jimmy Moffat showed up at the cell block. Moffat had known Ramos since Richie was a chubby little 8-year-old with a speech impediment who liked to hang out near cop cars and ask the men in uniform to, quote, play the siren. But Moffat almost walked right past Ramos's cell. He was looking for roly-poly Richie, but what he saw looked like a little Puerto Rican girl with small hips, a sweep of long hair, and prominent cheekbones. I spent a lot of time watching him, Moffat said later, but if I was standing out in the street and he walked past me, I wouldn't have known him. Even the scars were gone. Ramos's famous bullet hole scars that he wore like a badge of honor on his forehead after a 1988 shootout when he took 9 slugs, 5 to the head. Ramos loved those scars. Now they had vanished. It would take weeks for the name Dr. Castillo to slip from Ramos's lips, but when it did, it landed like a bomb. Even the cops, the hard-nosed, seen-it-all cops, couldn't believe it. They knew something had happened to Richie on the run. Someone had made him look different, but Pepe Castillo? Dr. Jose Pepe Castillo was a legend in Philadelphia's Latino community. He was a doctor, a plastic surgeon who, if he wanted to, could have made a fortune with his extraordinary skills. Instead, he chose to open a tiny clinic in the basement of his home to treat the poorest and the neediest. Plastic surgeons don't tend to be heroes. Castillo, however, saw his calling not in breast implants or facelifts for wealthy socialites, but in reconstructive work, like for children caught by bullets in the drug crossfire. Castillo would fix their tiny faces and repair their limbs, and he'd do these surgeries for free. Castillo never gave a damn about money. Most of Castillo's patients had everyday ailments in a world where being a poor Latino with no insurance usually meant you didn't have a prayer of being treated by a doctor, whether your problem was bunions or AIDS. Every other doctor, the first question is, "What insurance do you have?" says one of his patients. Pepe asks no questions, just, "Where you hurt?" A sign in his office requested those fortunate enough to get Medicaid to please contribute $1. Other patients would pay him with homemade tortillas, the way the old-fashioned doctors in his native Mexico were offered chickens for their services. Some brought him elephants, wooden elephants, brass elephants, stuffed elephants. A tradition started when a patient gave him one for good luck. After a while, he had hundreds. By February 1995, Pepe Castillo had such a reputation that President Clinton sent him a note of gratitude for supporting meaningful health care reform in the Latino community. And Pennsylvania Governor Tom Ridge wrote that he was appointing Castillo to a gubernatorial committee on farm labor. Those letters had just been framed and hung above Castillo's shabby desk in the spring of '96, when 2 cops showed up at his clinic with another note from the government, a target letter. Pepe Castillo was about to be indicted for harboring a fugitive. Ramos cooperated with the government from the start, knowing that he was looking at life without parole and that the only way to chisel that time down was to give the feds something they didn't already have. The only problem was that by the time Ramos was arrested, most of his drug-dealing cohorts arrested in a raid on the morning Ramos fled had already cut their own deals. There weren't many people left to flip on. So Ramos offered up his mistress, Luisa Rodriguez, who had served as his driver for 8 months while he was on the lam. Then he gave up Sonia Santa, his wife and the mother of his 3 children, who had also shuttled him around while he was in hiding. Ramos played his last card. A move that would ultimately shave his sentence to 30 years, 26 if he behaves himself. "There was someone else who helped me," Ramos said, "the doctor, Dr. Castillo." Those words, uttered in February '92, triggered a costly 5-year investigation by the federal government that would ultimately end with a staggering accusation that Pepe Castillo had used his extraordinary skills as a surgeon to alter the identity of Richie Ramos. The feds claimed in the indictment that Castillo fixed Ramos's nose, changed his face, altered his scars, sucked away his fat, even rotated the skin on the tips of his fingers. Castillo, they said, had done everything he could to make Ramos unrecognizable to police. The charge was almost too bizarre to believe. That man, who cared most for his drug-ravaged community, had helped the one person who had done the most to devastate that community. On February 27th at 4:28 p.m., the jury handed down its verdict. Castillo was guilty of obstruction of justice and conspiracy to harbor a fugitive. It was Pepe Castillo's 69th birthday. What the government said happened was this. On at least 8 different occasions while Richie Ramos was on the run, he showed up late at night on the doorstep of Dr. Jose Castillo. In the darkness, the doctor would quietly let him in. Castillo would lead Ramos past the office with the lucky elephants to a tiny sterile procedure room in the back, where Ramos would lie on a bare white table. Working alone, no nurse, no anesthesiologist, the doctor would sedate Ramos and go to work. He started with the nose, the prosecution asserted, cracking the bone and resetting the cartilage to make it thinner. On the next visit, Castillo went to work on the scars using synthetic material to fill in the skin under the bullet marks in Ramos's forehead. On another night, Castillo made an incision into Ramos's head to remove the bullet fragments that had been lodged there. Then came the cheekbones. By removing fat from Ramos's face, Castillo made it more gaunt, his cheekbones more pronounced. After that, Castillo moved on to the stomach. Twice he sliced Ramos's big belly open to suck out slabs of fat. He saved the fingertips for last. The news of the rotated fingertips dominated every story about the case. But what was lost in subsequent print and television accounts is that it is virtually impossible to alter fingerprints. Not one of the surgeries Castillo was accused of performing, even carving circles into fingers, was illegal, unless he knew that Richie Ramos was a fugitive from the law. Pepe cannot say no to anyone. Never could, says one of his friends and patients. If the devil approaches him, if a nun or priest approaches him, it does not matter. He cannot say no. But could Pepe Castillo not have known about Ramos, a man as legendary for his crimes as Castillo was for his good deeds? That was one question. Whether it would have mattered is another, because Castillo was an easy target for Richie Ramos. When Richie Ramos took the stand, he was very vague about what he did. He said, "I can't remember 127 times. Did Castillo operate on your nose first? I can't remember. Was money exchanged? I don't believe so," Ramos responded. "But did he know you were a fugitive?" This, Ramos remembered. "I never told him that." In the end, it always came back to the fingerprints, the operation that appeared to have no legitimate rationale. And perhaps that's where the answer lies to what really happened between Pepe Castillo and Richie Ramos. Castillo could never actually have thought he was changing Ramos's fingerprints. There isn't a credible plastic surgeon alive who thinks that that can be done by making small circular scars. But Richie Ramos didn't know that. Might the doctor have felt pressured to convince a lethal drug dealer that Pepe Castillo could make him disappear by changing his fingerprints? Because Richie Ramos didn't like to be given bad news? At the end of the trial, even the cops had their fingers crossed that Castillo would get on the stand and say 3 simple words: "I was threatened." But Castillo never testified. He kept his and Ramos's secret. His friends and patients have yet to find their peace. They ask themselves, was Castillo just another scared casualty of the Ramos drug war? Did he see Richie too as a victim of those drugs? Or did the doctor who could never say no simply get in over his head? But his friends are realists, and they wonder if there was ever a right decision for Pepe Castillo. They wonder, when evil shows up on your doorstep, how much choice do you have? Such an interesting story, and it is like something right out of a movie or a show, and just in case you were wondering if they could change a person's appearance, they can. And they have.
Dr. Kohler's been sighted, which is as rare as sighting the pygmy 3-toed sloth. Only 79 of the dear creatures are left.
Okay, I'll bite. Sighted where?
An elusive Russian arms dealer, a very successful jewel thief thought to be dead, a wanted forger who's dodged Interpol for nearly a decade. 3 examples of criminals we thought were dead or had gone dark, but who Reddington believes are still alive and well and continuing to commit crimes under new identities, courtesy of Dr. Hans Kohler.
That does it for this episode of the George Collection. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.
Of this extraordinary magazine, George, which is a hoot of a magazine. I thought you were a lawyer.
I was.
What happened?
Well, We decided, I mean, actually taking a cue from folks like yourself and you around the 1992 election, that there was an opportunity here to change the definition of a political magazine. Certainly the way Americans were accessing information about politics and politicians was changing. Candidates were appearing on late night talk shows, on talk radio, on sitcoms, and there was a kind of a leveling process, and while the rest of media clearly had caught up with that, we felt that political magazines per se hadn't.
Your mother was a hell of an editor at Doubleday.
That's what I hear.
Would she have liked George?
I think she would have.